Welcome, champions, to the next overview and tier list ranking, featuring the newest champion. This is where we'll break down their mechanics and place them in my overall tier list for every champion in the game. So let's talk about Astarion, the neutral evil high elf rogue in seat 10, and the next member of the absolute adversaries, meaning he's got that virus.
That boy got that virus.
Or rather, a tadpole in the old noggin. For those who don't recognize him or just don't know, like Lae'zel, he's from Baldur's Gate 3. He joins the roster as a support and gold find. Being a rogue and his main source of damage within the game of his origination, his primary attack is Sneak Attack, which will have him throw a dagger at a random enemy, which will deal 1 second of additional bud damage if the enemy was attacked within the last 3 seconds. And his ultimate will have Astarion attack the enemy with the most health on screen and heal himself to full health. Pretty basic, but it has a short cooldown and a reason you'll be wanting to actively use it, which you'll see in a second with his formation abilities. Before his bread and butter formation abilities, there's one mechanic to always keep in mind with Astarion. Being a vampire spawn, he is our next in line to count as dead for all intents and purposes, while existing within your formation. So now we have an additional, quote, dead champion to use with Desmond to give him another stack of Lament the Lost. Now, his main damage buffing formation ability, Outflank, is actually his first specialization choice, which comes early as his very first upgrade level. This is where you will choose which position in the formation he will buff with it, the top row or the bottom row. Like his affiliation member Lae'zel, this starts out as a very low buff, but has plenty of options for increasing its output. For starters again, being from Baldur's Gate 3, he's got that daggum tadpole in his brain. So he's our next Ceramorphosis stacking champion.
Ceramorphosis.
So now we have Lae'zel, Astarion, and for those who missed it, Narak can be used as a pseudo-member of the team, with a feat purchasable in the Thayan Enclave. If you happen to have missed it in this last emergence event and want it, don't worry. You'll be able to pick it up during the next emergence event when it happens. Just be sure you don't miss it that time. His gold find comes from Generational Wealth, where he increases the gold find of the formation by a lower percent, multiplied by the total age of all of the champions within your formation. This equates to a decent gold find buff, and very much contends with the only other gold find in his seat, Eliwick. But for Eliwick to compete, you need her to get some decent RNG. Meanwhile, Astarion is a slot and forget, so he is much easier to use. Not too bad. You might be wondering, how does that ultimate of his tie into buffing Outflank? And that is through Well Fed, where after using his ultimate, he will directly increase Outflank's output, stacking multiplicatively 5 times, and resetting when you change areas. So you want to use his ultimate as soon as it's up, and ideally be able to activate it multiple times in the same area. For an extra sprinkle of flair and encouragement to actively use his ultimate, he gains the Ultimate Outflank, where he reduces the active ultimate cooldown of other champions whenever he uses his ultimate, while he himself is being buffed by his own outflank. So be sure to keep him in whatever row you choose in your first specialization pick. Speaking of his specializations, we've talked about his first choice between the top and bottom rows for Outflank, but he has another choice. The choice is representative of his subclasses in Baldur's Gate 3. First, with Thief, he gains another form of gold find, where he increases the gold find of the group for each gold find champion slotted, stacking multiplicatively. Arcane Trickster will increase the buffing potential of Outflank for each champion in the formation that is either a rogue, wizard, or absolute adversary, stacking multiplicatively. And lastly, Assassin will increase his base attack's bud damage to 5 seconds instead of 1. Generally, you'll be taking the first for gold find, and the second for damage buffing, and the third for I feel like Assassin would have been better served as some kind of critical strike or damage buff. Or that his base attack didn't have bud attached to it, and this was how you did so. By increasing your damage, you're also effectively increasing your bud. So choosing to only increase your bud over damage buffing is a little strange. The only circumstance I see this being useful is if you can't stack Arcane Trickster very high. His equipment and feats are both pretty solid. An equipment slot for all damage, generational wealth for gold scaling, outflank, Ceramorphosis, and well-fed for damage scaling, and ultimate attack cooldown, which you actually want in this case, and a group of feats to cover all the bases you'd want for him. So let's talk about his event, Brightswords. We have Astarion, Daub, and Corazon this time around. Two interesting choices and one you'll probably want to ignore. Corazon does have an interesting mechanic in being able to make those who are not neutral count as neutral for mechanics that it matters for. But his scaling and buffing aren't great, and generally doesn't make up for that gap. Daub, however, is a great buffer with excellent availability that's easy to position, and has good gold find. But he shares a seat with Azaka, so you can't use him in an Azaka farm, so just keep that in mind with him. And of course our boy Astarion here is alright at buffing, with the best gold find in his seat. As far as a focus, if you're looking for one, I'd recommend Astarion, unless you have Daub in mind for your formation. But of course, try to full epic everyone you can, and keep in mind that it's Corazon's last event, before he's retired and only unlockable through time gates. Now what about his achievement and adventure variants? The achievement is another simple one, requiring you to reduce other champions' ultimate attack cooldown, with Astarion's, the ultimate outflank. So just be sure to actively use him for a while, and keep him buffed by his own outflank, then use his ultimate while having other champions' ultimates used and on cooldown so he can reduce them. As for his variants, we're back to him being forced in your formation for all of them, able to be moved but not removed. The first will only make it so champions on the top and bottom of the formation are able to deal damage. This is as simple as it gets, just put your DPS wherever you decide to position his outflank as you would anyway. The second will force you to only be able to use champions who are 50 years old or older. A somewhat harsh restriction, but still shouldn't be too much of an issue for anyone. His third will only allow you to use champions with a base ultimate attack cooldown of 300 seconds. Thankfully, it does not take gear into account, and we're only dealing with the base ultimate cooldown. Otherwise, this one would be a bit wild. Again, shouldn't be too hard for anyone. His availability is alright, available for 3 of 4 patrons, and missing out on the Strength and Charisma Trials lockouts, with no feats, at least yet, to counter them. He and his affiliation are an interesting one to watch, as they'll only grow in power the more Ceramorphosis stacks come to the game. Because now that Astarion's here, Lae'zel is effectively better than she was. It does inherently make them more restrictive though, requiring each other to fully take off. But when they do, their numbers are decent. I'm going to put him in a high B, hand in hand with his partner Lae'zel, as she now inches up a bit. They both stand to potentially have their rank increase as more Ceramorphosis stacks eventually get in the game. But who knows when and if that will be, and if when it does happen, if those other champions are any good. Astarion's damage buffing isn't the greatest, but can rise to a decent height, and his gold find is also good. Not the best, but the best in his seat, with a bit of a group ultimate cooldown reduction flavor. Solid champ, but nothing crazy. Thanks for stopping by. Leave a comment on what you think of Astarion, and what you hope to see in the future for Baldur's Gate 3 champions, should they ever arrive. But more importantly, have a hell of a time out there, champion.